Hello and welcome to LightWave 2019. I'm going to be doing a quick setup here on how to work with edges and the edge shader and to do some special effects using the edge weights because they are very powerful. Not exactly Substance Painter, but you can certainly get some very nice, quick and attractive effects within LightWave 2019. Okay, I've got a very simple scene set up here. I have using the Unreal shader today. It's a very simplified version of the principled BSDF and obviously compatible with the Unreal engine, but also directly with any very similar inputs from Substance Painter. So you've just got a base color, roughness, specular, metallic, emissive, and opacity. All of the other fancy controls on here. If you want to use the principled, it'll work exactly the same. It should look exactly the same. But just for this simplicity, I thought I'd just use this one. So in here, I have a couple of textures already set up. I have a very simple, I'll just show you in the image editor, normal map, and which is, as you can see, almost completely invisible. Make sure to set, of course, all normal maps to linear, and here a roughness texture. Again, automatically set these to linear. Only color maps should of course be in sRGB space, even though obviously we're working in sRGB space here. This is just a roughness texture map I've managed to get off the internet and blended with a few different other layers to give us this sort of very subtle effect with little lines and scratches and fingerprints and stuff. So I'll just shut that down. That just gives you a rough idea. If I am to look at the specular direct here, just to sort of show you how that's working, it's giving us a very, very subtle roughness. And to be honest, we don't want more than that. You can mess about until you're happy with this. You can adjust the strength of the normal map if it's too rough for you. And of course, these are just cubic textures. If you want a real UV map, obviously you're going to get less seams and issues. But as you can see, you're getting a very subtle roughness effect on the sharp highlight there. Okay, that's just a primer on what I've set up. Of course, I'm just using the new sun sky setup that I've used in my other video. It's giving us a very pleasant daylight look. So on with the show. First thing I'm going to show you is let's go to the tools, the edge shader. There's actually two shaders which we could look at, but I'm going to concentrate today on the edge shader. The patterner also does similar things, but today I'm just going to look at this. So this has two inputs, radius. You can detect whether you want to have convex or concave or both. You can make it beveled as opposed to rounded, and there's a threshold angle, so we'll dive right in. I'll plug that straight into normal, and you should see it immediately take effect. There we go. That is set to, let's see, 10 millimeters by default. On the scale of this object, that's probably just right. You might want to reduce it. I might make that perhaps 8 millimeters, not quite 5. And that's just pleasantly rounding all of our edges in the concavities and the extremities. Now, I added this little detail on top of here just to show this is where you wish to consider your edge threshold. It's not catching these top two edges because they're very shallow. And of course I want it to, so I will reduce the angle. I'll make it say 5, see if that works. Is that catching it? It's a little bit hard to see. Yes, it is. So you are seeing very, very subtle rounding on these very shallow angles. This, of course, is to taste and the scale of the model that you're using. Really huge models, you'll want to increase the radius. very, very tiny models, you'll want to, of course, decrease it to suit the scale of your scene. But these large cylinder objects are quite big, so 8mm looks about nice on it. Now there is a secondary output, but I'm going to duplicate this because I will need a second one of these. So I'll do a copy paste, and just to show you what this is doing, I'm going to look at the weight, plug that into base. This is actually the strength of the shader, and as you can see, it's picking up all of these edges beautifully. It's just a black and white ramp, which is what we're going to use to drive all of the special effects. So I will, now what I want to use is, I want to do a little worn edges effect. So that is far too tiny in this case. So I'm going to increase its radius to say, let's say 30mm. That might be just a little bit too much, but I'll leave it at that for the moment. Make it 25mm. That should suit our purposes. So you're sort of thinking, well, that's not really very worn edges. Well, I'm just showing you this in the base color, just to sort of give you a rough idea. But what we're going to do now is remap this using textures and gradient maps. So the first thing I'm going to do is get a texture. We will go and add a procedural. I'm going to use the new procedural texture. This actually uses procedurals from the layer menu, but wrapped up in a rather nice little procedural. So you can select from the drop down. I will use the dented, because that I found is a very good texture for doing this type of thing. So what I'm going to do is plug that into the radius. So I'll put the value is the bit that we need. And of course, the results are really weird. Now, well, of course, what we need to do is make the result maximum 25mm. So looking in the options, we have the various different settings, opacity and all that lot. But we want to use, I think I'll leave that for the moment. The background value and the foreground value. So foreground value, I will type in 25mm. Already we can see this procedure. Well, first of all, we know that we need to make the procedural smaller. So I'll just make this maybe 0.2. So there's 200mm, and we're starting to get nice. You can sort of see this nice dented effect. Now, because we are wanting perhaps slightly bigger areas and slightly smaller areas, I will increase that to maybe 30mm. And try making a smaller area. This is of course just all artistic. Make that 150mm. So we are starting to get a rather lovely dented, but of course it's got a very soft edge, which is not exactly what we want, but it gives us gives you an idea of what we're going to be doing with this. Now, the other thing I need to do is to put the background value at a negative value, so that we make sure that we don't end up with just very, very thin lines. It will just erode away completely and have areas which don't dent. So I'll make that perhaps minus 0.2. Maybe not as low as that. Perhaps make the scale a little smaller. No, that's not quite right. So I'll increase it to 150 again. Oops. and maybe make it perhaps a little bit. No, we'll leave that for the moment. Actually, that's nice. I could try different procedurals to see how that looked. We could try turbulence, which doesn't look quite right in this sense. We could try, I don't know, smoky. No, that doesn't look very good. Honeycomb would be pretty useless. Crumple. That's giving a nice effect, but I think I'll go back to dented. So it's giving us quite strong chip-like effects. I might make the scale a little tiny bit bigger. Oops. No, that's not worked at all. Okay, well, that for now. You can play about, and of course, once you've got your ideal settings, you simply swap out your textures for a different one if you find a better texture, but this will do for the moment. So we've got our procedurals ready to go. Now we want to start remapping and using a gradient shader to adjust these. So first of all, I will go into gradient and plug that into the input. So well, let's see, add in a second input here and make that a step, and plug that color into the base color. So what we have here is a hard edge, which is what we want for the transition between a paint and a metal. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good where we want it. So we'll make sure that value's a nice easy 0.5. Now, so what I can do there is if I unplug that from our base color temporarily and plug it into our metallic, it will then make everywhere where it's white is 100% metal, and everywhere where it is black will be paint. So there you go, we have a rather nice looking paint chip effect, but we can add a bit more detail to that. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste this gradient and use this for color. So what we can do is start adding, well, let's make a nice base color, perhaps a nice orange, something like that. It's quite saturated. I might just desaturate that a little bit. It was quite nice being a little bit more saturated than that. So we have a nice orange as our paint, and it goes to a hard metal. Now we can add a little bit of a wear effect by making, let's see, add another color here and another color just very close to there. So I'll lock that just in case I don't accidentally select it, and I'll make this blend to a gray. So that's white, and then take the value down to a light gray. Make these just a linear interpolation just to stop it from getting unwanted artifacts. And what we can see now is we have a very subtle wearing away at the edges. Now, of course, the white, we don't want to be white. We want that to be the color of the metal. And white would make an absolutely unrealistic chrome. So again, we'll make this a darker gray for a duller metal. And what we can even do, this is a rather nice effective trick, is if I'll drag that out and make that an even darker color. It gives us a very subtle occlusion-like effect. It looks as if it's darker inside these little recesses, which of course it's just fake, it's just the gradient. Now that's a bit strong, so I will lighten that up and make the radius just a smidge smaller. And there, that's a rather subtle but effective fake occlusion that we have going on in our little recessed areas. Now, another thing, I'm looking at this thinking, well, the metal could be a bit rougher. So what I will do is, well, we already have the black-white gradient, and we can use that to subtly adjust the roughness texture. A simple way of doing that would be to use the mixer tool. So I'll take the mixer, plug that into the background, that into the foreground, set that to be additive, plug that into our roughness. And of course that'd be far too rough, but I can just turn it down, maybe make it just 20% additional roughness. And there we go, we have the same texture will be visible. Just hide this so you can see these little dents and worn bits. A rough metal and a slightly less rough, all our normal maps and roughness textures are still working perfectly well. And we have a nice rounded edge. So we could try maybe adjust the texture again just to see if we can get a better looking one. So I'll add another procedural. Where is it? It's here. So perhaps we'll try turbulence. So again, we'd go to about a minus 0.02 and 0.03. See what that does if I plug that into radius. It's a bit too small. Try a different one. We'll try, let's see, FBM. Too small. Yeah, well, that looks quite nice. It's a little bit too even, perhaps. Try adjusting dented again. Make it even smaller, perhaps. No, that's not really working. Change the options, perhaps change the scale or the power. That's giving us a little bit more coverage. But perhaps we could decrease the foreground value just a smidge, because it's getting a little bit too strong. There we go, have a slightly different looking procedural here. You can of course put any number in, you could even use image textures. It will just drive the same effect. As long as you've got a gradient effect, you will start getting rather nice worn textures. And as a last thing, I'll just quickly enable go to the render properties, turn on the noise filter just to clean it all up. Take a few minutes to cook the image, and then the noise filter should start wiping away all the noise. There we go. It's a little bit slow to start sometimes. But that gives you an idea on how you can build a rather attractive edge shader, which has little bits of worn away paint and a slight fake occlusion effect in the recesses. As always, if you've got any questions or you need to know any more details on how to do this or any other similar effects, just feel free to ask. I've been Andrew Combe, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.